So next up is Michael Bisciglia with an IoT project. And, you know, I've kidded Travis a lot. But the truth is I'm going to miss an awful lot of you. Not all of you, but an awful lot of you. And I'm going to miss this guy too. I hope you keep coming back to visit.
Well, thank you for that introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Bisciglia, and thank you all for attending my senior capstone presentation. For my senior project, I decided to focus on IoT technology and data mapping in a project I call Map IoT, an indoor data mapping system. So within my 4 years as a student and then also a worker in the library, I've noticed that there's a slight inconvenience on campus, and that is indoor environments are frequently changing. For example, especially in the library, the temperature can range anywhere from 60 degrees to 80 degrees, and this is very inconvenient if you don't dress appropriately for that environment. As students and commoners at Carthage, we have no access to remotely view this data, but it would be very useful to do so we can dress accordingly, perhaps. While researching this question, I found that there were very few other indoor data mapping applications. There were a lot more for outside connected to Google Maps API, especially for geographic data mapping, but none at the microcosm level for indoor data mapping. So the solution that I came up with can be simplified into a few steps. The first step is just to add sensors to different rooms that you want to map data from. The second step is to send that data to the database I'm using. And then the third step is to display that data on a map for users to remotely view. So the research questions that I came up with for this project were what hardware is going to be best used for each one of my devices to host different sensors to send data to my database. How am I going to be transmitting that data from each device to my database? How should the data actually be stored on the database? How will the data be displayed on my website front end? And how should development allow for future extensibility? So the requirements that I put in place for this project were all of the data displays needed to be in real time. I wanted my website and devices to both be secure. I wanted an interactive website and also a modern looking website. And then also I needed to make sure that the data mapping was customizable and personalized for each individual to allow for a unique data mapping experience. So this is just a simple abstract of how my project flows. As you can see, on the left you have your sensors, which require authentication. On the right you have the website, which also requires authentication. So the sensor data and the website display is connected via the user login that I'll be showing later, but that's secured with Google Firebase authentication. The sensors send data to that Firebase database, and the website configures the floors, the rooms, and the images so you can match that data to a room. That's all saved on the database, and then users are able to access that data on the main display. So the hardware that I thought was best used for this project was a Raspberry Pi 3B+. The reason why is it has Wi-Fi enabled, which means that I'm easily able to connect to the internet and send data to Firebase. It also has multiple available GPIO pins, which is an acronym for General Purpose In and Out, and those are just ways of me interfacing with different types of sensors. Another positive thing about the Raspberry Pi is that it's run off of a Linux operating system, which we're all familiar with in the computer science department, and made it quite easy to develop on. And the last, probably the most important part, was that Raspberry Pis are very well documented. So if I ever ran into an issue, I was able to easily look up questions and get answers, and also just look up documentation to understand the hardware better. So for the website, I used semantic templating with handlebars, which is just a fancy way of saying that I was able to make my website look a little bit more modern without having to put in a lot of extra work to match all of my website pages. I also ran the web server that's connected to the database off of Node.js, and Express as a server framework to constantly be taking data from my server and pushing it to my website for a real-time data display. Along with the website, I have customizable mapping included, where I'm able to allow users to personalize their experience, and I'll get more into that. And it finally, for the website, is connected to a Firebase database where I'm pulling my data. So a little bit more on the Firebase database. Firebase database is a NoSQL cloud database. SQL stands for Standard Querying Language, and Firebase is not one of those. What it actually does is it works off of the Google Firebase API, And whatever language that you're working with, there's different types of interfacing with it. Another important part of Firebase is that all data is in real time with all clients, which means that I can have multiple sensors in different rooms, all sending data to my Firebase database and to the display at the same exact time. Data is stored in a JSON format, which is JavaScript object notation. Basically, that's just saying that it's a well-known format for me to easily send and receive data from my database. And the last 2 points on Firebase is it has customizable permissions and authentication available, both of which I've used to make my system as secure as possible. Okay, so for the demo. Let's run it. So this is the main sign-in page for my website. Once users navigate to the website, they have 2 options. They can either sign in or create an account, as well as if you create an account and you forget the password, you're able to reset it right there. I already have an account, so I'm going to be just signing into my own account for this. But what I'm going to be doing is showing an example of how you can add a floor, add rooms to that floor, and then send data to it. So once you sign in, it'll ask you to add a floor. Since we're actually on the first floor of Straz here, I have a device right here which will be sending temperature and humidity as a test. But I'm going to actually add data for this exact room that we're in currently. So we're on the first floor of Straz, so I'm going to go ahead and enter first for the floor. And then choose level 1 that we're currently on. And as soon as you submit, you'll get an image of the map that has just been added to the database. Yeah, and as you can see here, 199 is the room that we're currently in. I'll put my mouse over it if you couldn't see that. So then the next step is to add the rooms to this. I already have some other floors put in place with data coming in, but I'll get more on that in a little bit. So when we navigate to the first floor, we see here that the available sensors are 0, which is not what we want. We want data to be coming in so that we can map that data to the map. So when I go to the device that's currently sitting right over here, I'm just connected via an SSH connection. I run this script, which would normally be run by an administrator of this project, where then other users can connect and then just view the display. So first off, ask for my Firebase email. And because I do care about security, that's just my password. Floor name is first. And the room number that we're currently in is 199. As you see there, the first data point has been sent actually to the Firebase database, and those are our readings coming in. I sample every 5 seconds, but I'll get back on that in a second. So once we refresh the page and then go back to the first floor, we see that the available sensors are now 1, and we have a data point coming in from room 199. I'm going to go ahead and add a room of 199. Which gives me a draggable div that I've created in JavaScript to allow me to map data. Put it over the room that we're currently in. Confirm the room, and the available sensor here has gone green, which indicates that there's a connection in between the data coming in and then the room that's just been mapped to the display. So now when we actually go to the first floor in the room that we're currently in right now, we can see that the data for 199 is 44% humidity, 69.8 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's the timestamp associated with it, so you know it's real time. I'm going to go ahead actually and prove that it's in real time just by changing the data. Before it was, I think, 44% humidity. There we go. So hot breath works, 61% humidity. All right, and then that's the entirety of the demo that I wanted to share. As you can see on the other floors, like Terrace and then second floor as well for Straz, you can see that data mapping is pretty simple for users to navigate through. If perhaps they commonly have class in the Straz building, but in different rooms, they would want to be able to pull up these different floors and then navigate to the room they're going to and quickly see what the temperature is in that room. So for the project assessment, I was happy that I was able to meet all project requirements and more. I included real-time data, which definitely was a requirement in the beginning of the project. I made the entire system secure, which was an additional feature that I added later on. And I also made the project customizable to allow for different experiences with each user. The only reason I was able to do a lot of these things is because I used GitHub and source control. That gave me the reassurance that I can do testing and continue to develop code while having a place to go back to if I need to. And just because of that, I was able to add additional features. So for development advice, I would definitely recommend before any project to map out user experience. Oftentimes, like in a project, you might think, where should I be developing? There's a lot of things to do. I don't really know where to go from here. But if you have a solid understanding of how you want your user to experience your system, I believe that gives you kind of a fundamental a structure, I should say, for developing your project. You always know that there's some component that you can work on. The next piece of advice that I have is restructuring code is a necessary evil. So actually web development, database, and then for the most part hardware has been pretty new to me. And it definitely required me to restructure code several times. It wasn't fun to do. It was actually really difficult to do that. But restructuring code is definitely necessary. Oftentimes when you think about restructuring code, it's because you have a better understanding of the project that you're doing. And once you have the better understanding, you want to make sure your code reflects that. So restructuring code is difficult, but it's definitely necessary. And then again, just use source control because restructuring code is very difficult. And if you don't restructure your code properly, you're going to have broken code and not really know where to go from there. So the reflection, for a personal reflection, what I learned about myself while developing this is you have to enjoy what you do. This has been probably the longest project I've ever worked on. And I can tell you right now, if I didn't like what I was doing right now, it would be, especially a few months ago, it would be very difficult to continue to work on a project like this. Another thing, which is probably the most important thing to me, is understand how you best get work done. I heard some other presenters talk about how they were able to put aside 1 hour or maybe 1.5 hours per day and just do it incrementally like that. For me, I think I personally work best when I do large portions of the code at the same time. So understanding that about myself allowed me to develop a lot more effectively. And the last one is kind of a head scratcher, but it's okay to be discontent. And what I mean by that is if you're discontent with where your project is currently, that's an okay thing, because that leads you to kind of figure out what you need to improve on. And once you know what you need to improve on, it's a lot easier to develop. So it's okay to not always be content where you are in your project at that point. So thank you.
I've been project with that. Did you ever think about having, with working with it, do you think it'd be viable to have sort of your slave nodes be grabbing the data and then having your website hosted off of sort of like your master node or your master Raspberry Pi, and then all the data gets funneled to there, and then you could host it instead of locally on a machine on a Raspberry Pi? Do you think it'd be like strong enough, or rather it would have the specification, tech spec necessary?
I think I see what you're saying. So would the question then be, could you entirely do this type of project off of a Raspberry Pi or a series of Raspberry Pis? Yeah, I do think that's possible. Since it's run off of Linux, it's very easy to grab new packages and stuff like that. So I could have gotten JavaScript running on this. I could have been doing web design and stuff off of this. It definitely is easier to do it off of a computer just because of development alone. But yeah, that would perhaps be possible. I do like the effect of having a known server to basically funnel all the data through, especially since it's a stronger CPU than what a Raspberry Pi can offer. But yeah, it would be possible perhaps. Thank you.